Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant. The latest beta for Elite Dangerous, the RNGineers, has been with us for a while now, and I thought it about time to take a look at a subject that is at the very centre of this update, a subject which is heatedly debated among the community. That is, the topic of random number generation, or RNG, something that is so heavily a part of the update that among certain quarters the patch has endearingly gained the name the RNGineers. But before I go too far into that, what exactly is RNG and how is it being used within the engineers, and why do so many people care? Well, RNG, as I mentioned, means random number generation. At its most basic level, RNG is a dice roll. As a player, you have no control over the outcome, and the roll of the dice will determine what happens next. Within Elite Dangerous, this applies to the weapons and modules upgrades that the engineers perform for you. Each upgrade has a number of stats that can be changed either positively or negatively. The degree of those changes falls within predefined limits, but the final outcome is controlled by RNG. There's no way to affect their outcome, you simply press the button and wait to see what happens. Additionally, for weapons there is an additional dice roll which determines whether or not a special effect will be applied to the weapon, and if so, which one. For example, healing weapons or weapons that affect shields. Again, the player has no control over which special effect they would like, or even if they would actually get one. All of this is entirely random. Frontier have said that there are some things going on behind the scenes with the game which limit the potential outcomes, so it isn't quite as random as some people might think. But in my view, at the end of the day, random is random. And now, it seems that everyone has an opinion on the use of RNG within this update, and of course I'm not any different. So what I'm going to do is take a look at a few of those opinions from both sides of the argument, those that are in favour of it and those that would like to see it changed, and then at the end I will talk about my own thoughts on the subject. Now, of course, I can't possibly cover every single opinion out there, so this is just pretty much an overview of how things stand at the moment. And do keep in mind that Frontier have stated that they do want to change some sides of this, and I'll get into that a bit later on as well. So let's start with the things that some people are actually enjoying with the RNG, the things that people feel makes it good. One of these things is that some people often cite that this RNG element makes the game a bit more of a challenge. The way it used to be is that you could just go to an outfitting screen, in fact you still can go to the outfitting screen, and you just simply purchase the modules that you want, and so long as you've got the money to do that, you could build any ship. And what this essentially meant is that players were always using a specific ship and a specific build for each type of gameplay. So for argument's sake, if they wanted to do combat, they would go out there and build a certain ship in a very specific way. Now, the only challenge that this required was to have enough credits, and in some cases the correct rank, and then, so long as you had knowledge or access to the correct information, you could simply go out there and get your desired ship. Now, clearly that isn't possible with the addition of the random element to the engineers modules, because you have no choice in the outcome of your specific modules. So if you do want a specific fit, you can't really just go and get that, you'd have to keep rolling. Now, the chances are that if someone has the money, or the materials rather, they could just keep rolling until they get exactly what they want. But it does take a certain amount of time to collect all those materials, so it goes on a limit the amount of people that are going to actually be able to do that. So in this view, the challenge comes from the fact that you have no choice in the outcome of the ship itself, and you essentially have to roll with what you get. Another off-spin of this argument is that it makes the game a little bit more involving, because obviously everyone's ship is now going to be different, even if only subtly so. And of course this side of the argument suggests that there's now no longer a one ship wins all scenario. This is all quite favourable to many people because it prevents the game from being quite as linear as it perhaps could have been, and it prevents the game from going down some of the routes that other games such as World of Warcraft have gone, in that everyone might be trying to get a specific set of equipment. There is another big attraction to this side of the argument, and that's the attraction to the gamble. As with all types of gambling, there's the anticipation of the outcome, as well as the overwhelming sense of success when you actually achieve what you want. And of course, keep in mind that gambling here with the engineers is an entirely different beast altogether, because generally speaking, you're nearly always guaranteed of a positive outcome of some type. The gamble is in just how successful you actually are. So that's a few of the arguments in favour of the very heavy RNG elements of the game. Now let's take a look at some of the arguments that are against it. So one of the common arguments here is that it's just too damn random. There's not enough control over the build, so you can't determine the outcome, not in any way at all. So if you do have a particular ship build in mind, you're going to either have to get very, very lucky, or you're just going to have to go with what you got and make do. Which of course it means there's going to be people out there that have had quite a bit more lucky than you, and therefore are going to have the ship that's more optimal, or the ship that perhaps you wanted. Kind of hand-holding this argument is the notion that there's just not enough player input. You simply sit there, press a button, and just sit and wait for the result. This is, for many people, comparable to a fruit machine or a roulette wheel. And this is at direct odds with the other elements of the game, which either require a lot of skill or a direct input from the player in one way or another. And this extends into the time argument. For people who are determined to get a particular ship build, they will probably still achieve this. They will just have to keep rolling and re-rolling until they get exactly what they want. And this, of course, favours people who have got a lot more time on their hands. Talking of time, it can take quite a lot of time to go out there and collect all the various materials that are required for these upgrades. And for some people, investing that amount of time to simply use them on a dice roll is just a little bit too much. Now, Frontier have been listening to all of this, and they certainly seem to have taken some of it on board. And whilst RNG seems to be here to stay, they are willing to make a few changes. One of those changes is changing the requirements of material for some of the upgrades, and they reduce this by combining certain sets of material, which from my understanding means there'll be a few less different types of material that's actually out there. Another change is that there's information showing where these materials can actually be found, so it's less of a blind hunt and more of a directed search. So whilst those are both very welcome changes, they don't really address the crux of the issue. Well then, what are my thoughts on all of this? Well, I really like how all of this has added additional elements into the game. The engineers' bases and the engineers themselves add both life and an element of mystery. Some of the engineers are quite possibly going to be in very hard to reach locations. But it's not the engineers or the patch itself which is at focus here, it is the heavy RNG elements. My feeling is that the problem here is in how it has been presented. Most of us are fully aware that games rely on RNG one way or another, whether it's used to determine how much damage you dealt in the latest and greatest MMO, or whether it's used to dictate what loot is found inside that next chest. In the majority of cases, the RNG, however, is hidden behind the game world, behind the swing of the weapon, or behind the opening of a chest. Here though, in the Engineers, it is shown as the throw of sliders and the spinning of a wheel. This immediately, I think, brings to mind the notion of gambling, and I feel the comparison to fruit machines is both very fair and very valid. Now, I appreciate that there is a lot more going on under the hood than we actually get to see, but perhaps the solution to this is to allow the player to see more of those inner workings and then contextualise them in a manner that makes sense in terms of the game world that we are all playing within. I agree with the thought that it takes a very long time to collect materials, especially if you don't have a lot of time to play the game, but of course we don't know yet how this is going to be when the game, or when the patch rather, hits the release servers. It might well be quite different. But at any rate, using them up on a wasted dice throw does feel very harsh. But do let me clarify that a bit. I believe there is indeed a place for RNG within this game, and in fact I feel it is essential, both to add variety and to prevent too much linearity. However, we do need some player input into all of this, because right now it is all out of the player's hands. Now, I'm no game designer, so I couldn't possibly suggest a solution that I could guarantee would work, but perhaps the player could have some input over one of the stat sliders, or perhaps the special effect could be pre-selected by the player at the risk of greater stat variation. Maybe, if we choose to discard an upgrade, the material costs could be incrementally offset against a credit payment. Now, those are just some random ideas I'm putting out there, and of course I'm fully aware that many other people have had very similar or even the same ideas as well. At the end of the day, and in my inexperienced opinion, I feel that this whole issue could be relatively easily addressed by these 2 points then. First, hide the RNG. It doesn't need to be in our faces to this extent. Second, allow some player input into the process, to whatever extent Frontier feel would work. Both of these would go a long way to making everything feel less of a gamble and a bit more directed, even if ultimately the final result is exactly the same. As I've stated elsewhere, I think the Engineers is a fantastic addition to the game, and also feel that RNG isn't too much of a problem in itself, rather it is how it has been presented to the player, in addition to the fact that it is completely autonomous. Now, Frontier have clearly got some very detailed plans on exactly where they want to take the Engineers and Elite Dangerous overall. But hopefully they're also listening to the feedback, and hopefully there's some time yet left during beta so they can make some much needed changes before this patch hits the live servers. And of course there's still the whole issue of gaining rep with the Engineers themselves, but that is another subject for another time. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time. This is Space Engine, I'm Obsidian Ant, and today we're going to go on a tour through space. Now, Space Engine, for those of you that don't know, is a fully simulated universe. You can go absolutely anywhere within it, any planet, any star, any galaxy, any nebula, literally anywhere you can imagine. The galaxies out there are full of natural wonders, full of beauty. It's absolutely stunning places like these two massive planets here. Now, these two planets are extremely hot, very close to their local star. The one in the background there is a gas giant, and this planet here is known as a scorched desert.